Good morning here at the beautiful Blogging Heads American Prospect Satellite Headquarters. I'm Ezra Klein here with Reihan Salam. How's it going, Reihan?
Hi, Ezra. I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm all right. I think we should probably take a moment here to say rest in peace to Stephanie Tubbs-Jones, who sadly passed away earlier today after suffering an aneurysm while driving. So that's sort of a pity.
Oh, that's very sad. Have you met her? Have you interacted with her at all?
I have not, actually. It's one of those things where there's a sort of... It's odd, too, because there are politicians I feel like I have a sort of fake intimacy with because I'm used to seeing them on the television, but her somehow I really just... I know the name, and I feel like I know who she is, but in a way I don't have a really clear understanding of her role in public life, which makes me feel a little bit bad, actually, but, it's a sad story, and, thoughts go out to her family and friends, obviously.
You know that, we're in a campaign season, and a lot of really rough charges are sort of lobbied back and forth. I want to introduce right now, very briefly, a new smear into American politics, which is that you, Ezra Klein, are actually a tool of the Brazilians, and that you've tried to conceal your role as a double agent of Lula. In America. So tell me a bit about your love of Brazil and how your love of Brazil is leading you to seek to undermine the United States so that Brazil will become a continental hegemon.
I actually oddly don't have a love of Brazil. I am, as sort of Reihan implies here, half Brazilian, been there many times, have a lot of family there. The interesting related topic here is I went on vacation a week ago, as I was just telling you before we began. I actually went to Israel. And it's ongoing to Israel because you sort of have to specify. I did not go there on a right-wing junket. I just went to visit a friend whose grandparent lives in Tel Aviv, so I had a place to stay when I needed to take a bit of vacation. But the amazing thing about Tel Aviv is that it looks exactly like Rio. I mean, the infrastructure is almost a perfect approximation.
Oh, wow.
And which is to say it actually looks more run down than you'd expect. The sort of beachfront has an interesting sort of two-ring design, just like Rio does. The hotels look the same. My friend's grandmother's apartment looked like my grandmother's apartment, complete with pictures of young Jews before they grew up to be her adult son, who looks like pictures of my father when he was a young Jew before he grew up to be an adult. So it was incredibly surprising.
Isn't Tel Aviv like this amazing all-night city? Isn't it this incredibly festive place? I just hear that people are up at 4 a.m. Gyrating, that kind of thing. Am I imagining?
Oh, tons of gyrating. No, I mean it's possible that there are huge parties going on and nobody told me about them. In fact, I'm sure that was the case, but. It's a funny thing that when I go on vacation, I tend to just basically go to bed early because that's really what I don't get to do when I live in D.C. So I went out of bed in Tel Aviv, but not to any sort of massive outdoor Yiddish raves or anything.
So tell me, how old was your father when he left Brazil?
When he left Brazil, I don't know how old. I think it was in the late 70s. He left Brazil to come to America and finish his mathematics degree.
Oh, wow.
And sort of has lived here ever since. But when I came back from Israel, I came back and my long-awaited co-bylined with my colleague Dana Goldstein, our piece on Obama's relationship to the Democratic Party infrastructure had come out. And I feel that we should engage in some serious promotion for my...
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first of all, I thought it was really, really fascinating. I think that, you make the point, and this is a point that's been made before, and it's worth emphasizing that Bill Clinton was a sui generis figure. He was a figure who didn't engage in party building. This was a very explicit political strategy of his, and I think that some have suggested that Obama is the same, but you're arguing that he's not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. He is someone who's deeply interested in building a Democratic Party that will outlast him and that will flourish.
Mm-hmm. I'd be a bit more charitable to Clinton, which is that I don't think he didn't want to. I mean, I think all else being equal, one of the points I make in the piece is that all else being equal, I mean, every president would like to have 350 members of Congress on his team and a massive grassroots movement out there. But Clinton ran at a point where you weren't going to get elected if you were too tightly associated with a sort of collection of interest groups and sort of anchors that were the sort of late 80s, early 90s Democratic Party. And that part of what Obama is able to do has to do with, the fact that a mixture of sort of Clinton changing the party and sort of reforming parts of it, and then Bush collapsing the Republican Party's brand, has made it much, much simpler to be tightly associated with the Democratic Party because it isn't toxic anymore. I mean, brand-wise, I got this real interesting data from Pew. You know, a pretty good way to understand how a party is doing in public perception is to see how young people feel about it, because they've only been they only understand the party as it is right now. They're not like folks who can remember back when Lyndon Johnson was creating the Great Society. And in the early 90s, Democrats tend to have an advantage in party registration, even as they don't, necessarily win more elections. But in the early 90s, Republicans are actually ahead among Generation X, which is just sort of coming into voting age, and late boomers. They're ahead. It's the only age group they're ahead with. In the early aughts, or in 2008, Obama is ahead among Gen Y by something like 29 or 34. I don't have the number in front of me, but an incredible margin. And he's ahead among Gen X, who was voting for Bush as recently 3 years ago, by 12 points. Now, things tighten up as you get sort of later on into the age distribution, but it's really a sort of striking thing to look at that, if you're just looking at these parties right now for the first time, in general, you are overwhelmingly Democratic. Yeah. And I think there's sort of like a stereotype that that's true for youth always, but it wasn't in the 90s. They were trending Republican, and now it's completely flipped. So I think there's a real way in which Obama is benefiting from being able to time.
But he's also running behind the Democratic Party, right? I mean, he's running. He's running behind the generic, congressional Democratic Party.
All Democrats run behind the generic. I don't know why, but people really like the sort of just like the idea of the Democratic Party will one day put like a sort of shadow, like the sort of guy you see before you pick your character in a video game. And I don't know why people dislike the candidates so much more. But
to what extent do you think this reflects a kind of deeper? To what extent do you think this reflects not so much the kind of opportunities he's presented with right now, but rather kind of thoughts that he's been developing as he's considered a kind of national political career, from like, the 04 race, etc. I mean, what is your understanding of how deeply Obama feels about party building?
Right. I mean, I think there are a couple of things going on. One is sort of he's taking advantage of a good historical moment, right? So as I said, party's in better shape. The other thing is fundraising, right? One of the problems for any party builder before is that the presidential wing and the congressional wings and the state wings all sort of competed for a very limited number of dollars. I mean, in the 80s, in the 90s, the Democrats really, really could not fundraise to parity with Republicans. And a lot of the DLC project, much of what the Blue Dogs have been about, was about trying to come to an ideology and a sort of pro-corporate stance that would aid that fundraising a little bit. Obama, sort of for reasons of, again, collapsing Republicans, but also internet fundraising and the rise of Netroots and McCain-Feingold, this and that, is outraising Republicans overwhelmingly. And the D-Trip is outraising the Republican Congressional Committee. The DSCC is outraising the Republican counterparts. So there's a lot of money around. The party isn't cannibalizing itself, which then gets to sort of the ideological portion of it. It's really interesting to look at who's around Obama, right? People think of him as a very new element on the field. But if you look at his staff, the people who support him, it's not kids. It's not like a bunch of Netroots folks, and it's not loyalists from Chicago. When Bill Clinton ran for president, he had two sort of southern-based populist consultants, Paul Carville and Begala, and his first chief of staff was an Arkansas kindergarten friend named Mac McLarty. Obama is completely different. He doesn't have the Clinton people so much. What he's got is a congressional wing of the party, and it's an interesting historical accident. Obama comes into power.
It's also like you make this point, and this is something that I'd noticed sort of before too, that he really has taken on the identity of a kind of Midwestern. He's though he's an urban figure. I mean, the candidates that he resembles most in a way are Tom Harkin, Tom Daschle, and also he's even.
I wouldn't put Harkin in there. I mean,
I think Harkin is fair because there's a kind of soft. I mean, I think that in terms of kind of the foreign policy kind of soft dovishness, I think that just in terms of the broad identity, because again, people like Ron Brownstein has commented on how he's a wine track candidate who is also a black candidate, and so by virtue of being both of those things. But I think that he's three things. I mean, there's the wine track element, there's the black element, but then there's also this element of this Midwestern figure, and it's a kind of regional affect that is not actually offensive to people. It's something that's rather appealing. And I think that it's very interesting, and I think it helped neutralize some things, at least earlier on in the campaign, before there was an effort to kind of define him in a kind of different. I'm not sure I agree on the Midwestern part, but what I just say is that he came in a weird moment, right, where Daschle was unexpectedly beaten.
and Gebhardt lost the presidential election, so he came out. So in 2004, when Democrats lose, all of the staff to the congressional leadership comes open. And suddenly you have the only bright spot on the landscape is a sort of charismatic young black senator. He gets an audience with Daschle's chief of staff, this guy Pete Rouse, who people call the 101st senator. And Rouse, after some cajoling, accepts becoming the chief of staff from being the majority leader's chief of staff to the chief of staff of the most junior senator in the Senate. It's sort of an amazing thing. And then as Obama sort of rises, he builds out an organization composed of all of these people. And it's interesting because these are the people who were within the party apparatus, a sort of congressional party apparatus during Clinton. These are the people who both have this sort of national legislative experience, but also they're the folks who have it sort of really bred into their bones that if you don't have the infrastructure beneath you, the executive is not going to be a success. So they come in, and I think that's a big part of what's going on with Obama, that he's got all these folks who, really deep inside, they get that the president is part of a broader sort of, they understand how to contextualize the president as part of a broader party, and they realize that he's not going to be able to wield power if the other portions of that body are not strong. Then you think Obama's from Chicago, right, which is sort of legendarily strong party.
I
so
do think that,
well.
I think the Midwestern element, my case for it is also just in terms of the kind of alliances that Obama's tried to build also with, certain Republicans. You have Lugar, you have Hagel, who just represent a different strain that is, you could say, certainly in terms of foreign policy. And I think that the idea of, there is this way in which these kind of thinly populated states, but there are swing states that have a kind of sensibility that does, again, I think there's a way in which, for example, the Northeast, or Kerry as a figure from Boston, or Mike Huckabee as a figure from Arkansas, from these very kind of highly distinctive regional cultures, is a turnoff. And I think that similarly, having been closely identified as an urban candidate, we haven't had an urban candidate in the way that Obama, is potentially an urban candidate for certainly as long as I can remember. But I think that by actually kind of neutralizing that identity, I think that people often talked about Daschle as a presidential candidate. I always thought that it was an interesting idea because of his mild cultural conservatism, or at least ability to speak that language. And I think that, kind of Obama, it's very interesting and impressive how he was able to kind of take on some of those qualities to become a more formidable candidate than he would have been otherwise.
I think it is an interesting point. I don't know if I'd call it Midwestern. I think part of what goes on with Obama is a sort of outsiderness. I mean, one of the reasons I think that he doesn't have a sort of very distinctive regional flavor to him.
Well, yeah, obviously, because he
grew up outside of so many.
Yeah.
I mean, there was Hawaii, and then there was Chicago, there was Indonesia, and this and that. So I'm not sure. But
there's who he actually is, but there's also the political
sort of
identity.
Parkin and Daschle.
Yeah. I think that
I just not sure I see it. I hear what you're saying, but I think that when I look at Obama and say Ben Nelson next to each other, I'm just not sure I see all that much there that connects them. I think that there's a sort of mildness to Obama that is often sort of correctly taken as a cerebralness, but somebody made this point to me that apparently people on Barack Obama's campaign call the occasional weird interaction with him, because he can be a bit weird and one-on-one, Barack-ward. I think there's a little bit of that. He's this sort of intelligence that it's not like a sort of Edwards or a Clinton who are right there with you and they really get people. Obama, if you read his books or you hear him speak, it always feels like his brain is a little bit in the corner of the room observing.
Yeah.
He thinks a little bit more like a novelist.
I think we're definitely talking about two different things. I think I'm talking less about his, kind of individual character, and I'm talking more about, I think that regional identity is, an important part of how one connects with voters, and I think that a lot of that is about how you structure your campaign and also how you talk about social issues, for example. I think that, this whole idea that, for example, Appalachian voters have a kind of distinctive worldview that inclines them towards or more often against certain kinds of candidates. And I think that similarly, when you imagine, what I think of as the optimal Republican candidate would probably be a Catholic Midwestern governor. I think that, similarly, but this is sort of all a little academic. But back to the piece. Do you see, as a result of this active party building, as a result of the restoration of the Democratic brand, a greater degree of ideological coherence within the future Democratic delegation to the Congress?
I think one of the interesting things about the primary, right, was, as sort of Artur Davis, as congressman from Alabama, says to me in the piece, that all these guys line up and girls line up within 10 yards of each other. you just don't have a real big fight. I mean, even the fights one could imagine having, by the time the primary came about, everybody was just opposing the Iraq War, but arguing over whether or not they opposed it early enough. There was a big healthcare fight. I was part of that. But, I mean, the difference on a mandate is not the biggest thing in the world. You look back to 2004, there was a real ideological distinction between a guy like Dean, who opposed the war then, and a guy like Edwards or Kerry, who supported it then. There's a real difference between Gephardt, who had a universal health care plan, and Kerry or Edwards, who didn't. And so there were real sort of battles going on. And I think the longer you're in opposition, the more those tensions are papered over by just sort of a need to get back into power. I think it's a really open question of whether or not that will re-erupt if you get into power. What I will say is that the party building will give Obama a whole lot of chits if he is able to sort of successfully achieve office, and he will help elect a lot of people. His organization will be able to control a lot of money, a lot of fundraising power, a lot of resources that individual congressional candidates are going to want to take part of. And so if he's able to retain a sort of personal popularity, that, combined with his machine, is going to give him not necessarily ideological coherence. Whether or not congressmen will deep inside agree with Barack Obama, open question. But it will give him a sort of political power where they will sort of realize that it is in their best interest to cooperate with his agenda. And I think that's something that you're increasingly seeing in both parties. There's a parliamentarization of the whole Congress. And, one of the reasons politics is broken, frankly, and I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, is that parties see, in a way they didn't 15, 20, 40 years ago, they see the success of the president. If he's from their party, then the congressmen see his achievements as their best ticket to re-election. And if he's not, obstructing him and making him a failure is the best ticket to knocking out members of his party. You have a weird thing where the logic of opposition and the logic of sort of mindless support are incredibly strong right now. And I think that is only going to increase with Obama. In many ways, I think that's a good thing. I would like to see Democrats all sort of just unite around a basically good health care plan and not get super, involved in factional battling over it. But, others could look at that and see in that sort of increased lockstepedness a real problem.
Do you see any potential points of fracture within the future Democratic congressional delegation?
I mean, you can imagine a lot, right? The big one, or the obvious early one, is going to be over how do you spend? Do you spend to spend on the deficit, or do you spend on social investment? I mean, this was a problem for Clinton, too. There's going to be, issues over foreign policy. Iraq is not going to be as settled as you see it looking right now, maybe in Democratic politics. And, things that arise. I think global warming is going to be incredibly contentious because, particularly in Congress, in the House, people forget how sort of regional an issue like energy is, how many different regions and districts have a real investment in coal or corn or biofuels or whatever. And I think it's going to be extremely hard to sort of sync what Democrats from Michigan want with what Democrats from California want. And so, oddly enough, I think a lot of it's not necessarily going to be an ideological battle you're going to see fought right there, but you're going to see a lot of sort of very parochial battles fought over some of these issues. And, like with everyone else, we'll see how Obama handles it. One thing that I think is encouraging for him, has nothing to do with party building, is that, Carter or Clinton, they didn't know how to deal with Congress at all. They didn't have a lot of people who were from Congress. Until Clinton hired David Gergen, he was really sort of flying blind. He didn't know how to run his branch. Carter runs into the appropriations chairs, finds his whole agenda stymied. Obama's coming in with just a real array of people with deep and broad relationships in the legislature, and he's been in the legislature. And I think that'll actually help him sort of, at least have programmatic understanding of how you navigate that terrain. Whether or not he's able to sync up their vision of what to do with his, I think he's got a good shot at it, but, it could all fall apart.
So tell me, you co-authored this piece with Dana Goldstein. How did you manage that? What was the division of labor? You've done some co-authoring before with Matt Iglesias, and I'm always curious.
I've never written anything with Matt.
Oh, you didn't write?
The Incompetence Dodge? No, Sam Rosenfeld.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Great piece. People should read it. No problem. Dana and I had a great time working together. Dana's a good friend. She's a brilliant reporter and writer, and she. In some ways, I have a little bit more of the blogger in me, where I'm, or maybe the researcher or something, and she's a bit of more of a reporter type. So it actually worked really well. I did a little bit more of digging and mining and data, and she did, and we worked together on calling a lot of people. So it's funny. I think if you know the two of us well, you can actually see which sections are written by which. And she did a beautiful job on hers, and I think we're both pretty happy with how it came out.
So, would you say that you started out from roughly the same place in terms of your view of Obama and the future of the Democratic Party, or
actually no? This piece was not supposed to be about Obama. It was supposed to be about how the sort of infrastructure of the Democratic Party, how its power centers are changing. When we began looking into it, it became clear that you couldn't disentangle that story from Barack Obama. And as we sort of peered yet deeper into it, it became clear that he was doing something pretty interesting. I mean, I was somebody who was a real skeptic of Barack Obama's vision of political change. The sort of unity stuff, the post-partisan rhetoric, I found a lot of that to be a little bit fuzzy for my taste. These things are going to be a fight. And it was actually doing this article that made me a lot more comfortable with his sort of attitude towards governance, because I make this point at the end of the piece, and it's one I hadn't really thought about until now, but if you look deep into his sort of unity on change, his tendency to say that the American people are ready for big changes, not just small ones. They're ready for real action on healthcare and Iraq and global warming and this and that. And yeah, I mean, he always talks about bringing the American people together, but what he actually talks about bringing them together around is legislative success, mainly the success of his agenda. And it's a plausible point, right? I mean, if you imagine that what people are really frustrated by is not ideological grievance, but congressional gridlock, and I think there's a lot of reason to believe that, then conceiving of a political program in which you help elect a lot of other senators and congressmen, and then you pass your agenda, and people sort of unite around a functioning government again, it's a bit of a soft bigotry of low expectations that people have for Washington, but I think it has a possibility of working. There are a lot of ifs there. If Obama is elected, if these people are elected, if his agenda can actually make it through the sort of filibustering in the Senate and this and that. But it did give me some confidence that there's a sort of harder-nosed understanding of how you wield power in American politics, of how particularly the executive wields power in American politics, and the sort of infrastructure he needs under him as support, that I hadn't really realized Obama had until I began actually tracking, where he was spending his money, what he was saying, what he was telling people. In that way, I was much more optimistic about him after I finished a piece and when I began it. But, again, could all be proven wrong.
Interesting. Is there anything else about the piece that you think we ought to know about?
No, I think you've covered it. You've covered it very adeptly.
So it's very interesting to me. So, with regard to the vice presidential selection, it's interesting because it does seem as though, well, I mean, we have no idea yet, but vis-a-vis the rumors of an Evan Bayh selection, and then the subsequent rumors that a lot of the powerful distaste for Evan Bayh among the Netroots has ruled him out as a possibility. How do you feel about how the Netroots is, and that's obviously such an incredibly broad term that encompasses a very kind of diverse ideological range, etc. But how do you feel about sort of the people that you kind of think of as powerful and influential voices sort of within the Netroots? Have they been wielding their power? Do you feel like they've been wielding their power in a deft, effective way? I mean, it seems that, you mentioned in the piece various ways in which Obama has veered to the center, for example, on NSA surveillance policy, etc. And, do you feel as though folks in the Netroots have been a little too rigid, aggressive, and ideological? Have they been too accommodating? What's your general sense of the state of play?
I don't think the Obama campaign, and for better or for worse, but I don't think the Obama campaign gives a damn what the Netroots think. I think that they've actually been incredibly ineffective at pushing them or really having, any serious point of entree into the campaign's internal decision-making or internal thinking. Evan Bayh, I don't think he's out of the running, number one. By the way, by the time this goes up, there may well be a vice presidential pick. So, if so, please think of this as a prescient conversation on what will happen in 2 months. But, I don't think Evan Bayh is out of the running. But the problems people have with him are broader. I mean, some of the things that he's known for, like, enthusiastic support of the bankruptcy bill, enthusiastic support of the Iraq war, those have contradictions and clashes with messages the Obama campaign is trying to make. So if they end up knocking him out, I don't think it's because Matt Stoller and Marco Sinigas don't like Bayh, but because, some of the things that liberals are pointing out about Bayh, the Obama campaign ends up concluding are real vulnerabilities. But I think it is interesting that you've been seeing them sort of, at least in what they're leaking, veering back to people like Biden and Bai, who bring in a sort of, again, a congressional viewpoint of legislative experience. I think there's a lot to recommend that. I don't like Bai. My big problem with Bai, aside from some ideological things I have trouble with him on, is that you're not getting another Democrat in Indiana, and you need that seat.
Yeah.
So that's one issue I have. But I think it is interesting to sort of point out that, you know, the general idea here is that you go with governors, but they do seem to be looking at a lot of senators. And, you know, who knows? Maybe we'll wake up tomorrow and Kathleen Sebelius will have gotten the nod. And if so, bless him for it. I'm a huge Kathleen Sebelius fan. Oh, yeah, huge. I've been pushing her. I wanted my ticket in 04 was Clark Sebelius, and I was pushing that in 03. So I just want to say I was on the Sebelius train way long ago.
Wait, so tell me about this.
Awesome.
Tell me about this. Why is that? Is it because, you know, my understanding is that, you know, she's tangled with her church, you know, in Kansas, and that sort of is something that, you know, could be a potential liability. But also that, you know, Kansas is a state that's pretty unlikely to flip. But, I mean, of course, that's not necessarily, you know, why you choose it for deeper resonances sometimes. But, you know, tell me about that and your enthusiasm for her. I mean, I understand that she actually has been pretty aggressive on environmental issues. But, yeah, I'm curious.
She's been aggressive on environmental issues, as you say. I think there are a couple things, right? Number one, I think actually, on a very sort of simple, almost reductive level, I would really like to see a woman in that spot. I think that it is something that, you know, people in this country should basically be embarrassed about. That the majority of the electorate is female. We've had one female vice presidential nominee, and no women in the presidency. And you know, so there's a lot of me that really, you know, understood and bought into the sort of historic nature of Clinton's candidacy. And you know, there was an element of sadness when that fell apart. I mean, you don't want to match it up against Obama, and you know, at the end of the day, you want to look at issues and, you know, electability and all that too. So it's complicated, but I would like to see her there. I would like to see a woman in line for that office. Sebelius has also just been an incredibly skilled and interesting political operator in a way that, you know, you really got to give her credit for. She's out there. She flipped the former state Republican chairman to be her lieutenant governor. She flipped the DA of Johnson County to be the Democratic Attorney General. She flipped 6 members of the legislature to run as Democrats and win. So, you know, Obama talks about a sort of unity and bringing people together, but, like, this is unity I can get behind. Like,
unity of Republicans
divisions
defecting to the Democratic Party.
Right, unity of continued Democratic dominance.
So basically, you would like to set up like something
back.
like in Brazil under the military junta. They had the Brazilian Democratic Movement, just get all of the, you know, unite everyone under the Democratic Party umbrella, and then have like a formal opposition party that would be reserved 15% of the seats, and they could control some guerrilla territory, like in the Mountain West.
Right.
And sort of have
Listen, I think that there is a real role for an incredibly weak Republican Party in this country. And I'm not a one-party guy, no. But, you know, she's been extremely effective in a state where, you know, Kansas is complicated, right? It's real Republican dominance, but the Republican Party, sort of in a dominant position, has begun to fracture. Yeah. And she's been extremely adept at taking advantage of that. So I think that there's something real to be said about her political skill. Yeah, I would like the sheer image of her and Obama on a stage together. I just think that would sort of channel so much youth and energy, you know, just visually, that I think would be extremely powerful in front of John McCain. And, you know, he's waiting till after Obama.
She is from a bipartisan family.
Sebelius, she may go to Meg Whitman or something. But I think it'd be extremely, extremely powerful to see that on the cover of Time or anywhere else. And I don't know. I just have I have sort of great respect for any Democrat, any liberal Democrat, any female, you know, or at least liberalish Democrat who can get elected and become incredibly popular in a state like Kansas. And on some level, you know, I watched her speak, and it's not the most scintillating experience one can imagine, but I do sort of trust that the people who inspire me are not those who inspire everybody else in the country, and you got to trust in political skills that win in a place where Democrats don't generally. I don't think, by the way, that she'll flip Kansas or even flip anything. Quick side note to Sebelius, though, is that her father,
wasn't he the governor of Ohio or something like that?
Governor of Ohio, still extremely popular, was on the Cleveland School Board till a couple years back. So she's got a useful connection to a state that, you know, it wouldn't be terrible if Democrats won it in the fall.
Help me out here, Ezra.
But wait,
no
so
one
you tell me, if you
could
could choose it, who would be the VP? Both ends.
I wanted to ask you though briefly. Ted Strickland. I feel like we never hear about him anymore. Obviously, he said he's ruled himself out, but I mean, I feel like that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Why is it that he's not being taken more seriously?
I don't know. He said he wouldn't. He said he wouldn't submit to the process.
Oh well,
he did the
that's actually I guess that's pretty strong, isn't it? I mean,
he did. He's the only one really who did a Sherman-esque denial. He didn't just say, "I don't want it. I don't expect it. I don't think I'm the best candidate." He said, "I will not take it. If they offer it to me, I will not serve. And if they ask me for documents for vetting, I will not turn them over." So that was that. So with him out of the picture, though, I want to hear the Reihan Salam.
I mean, I actually do think that Ted Strickland has a lot of the supposed strengths that Tim Kaine has, but also has a longer track record. I think that he is, decidedly on the left end on economic issues, which I think is not a bad thing, given that he can, not a bad thing politically, given that he can sort of, talk about these things in compelling ways. I think that Ohio in 2006 was just a fascinating race. I think that Sherrod Brown's victory was a really big deal because Sherrod Brown is decidedly left of center, and I think that he ran a campaign that didn't run away from that at all. So I think that sort of given the demographic composition of the state, I think it's so important. I mean, I will from time to time. That's exaggerating. But I mean, yesterday I played with that little electoral college calculator on opinionjournal.com and it's like Ohio is just, obviously super important.
Right.
And, clearly he's not in contention. I think that Tim Kaine would, be an obvious mistake. I actually do think that Evan Bayh has, just a lot of appeal because, again, I have this reading, which, you disagree with, but of, Obama as having projected a kind of Midwestern affect during his time of maximum success. I think that the Jeremiah Wright incident actually complicated that narrative and actually, sort of is, and there's an effort to back him into a corner of his, kind of elite affiliations and sort of, being from a big city, being from this, so I think that, that would kind of help reinforce that. Though I think that certainly, there are a lot of problems with Evan Bayh. I mean, it's simply not credible. I didn't know what the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq was. I don't remember. I mean, perhaps it was about liberating Iraq. I mean, just, is my guess. But I think that, he's also just, been around for a really long time. I think that it's not unimaginable that he could flip in Indiana. So I think that, he's appealing for those reasons. It's too bad that there are no credible, Floridian candidates, although I actually find it hard to imagine Obama winning Florida. Maybe it'll happen. I mean, if it does happen, that's going to be a total rout. A question for you, given the kind of party building that you're talking about in this article. I know a lot of bright people have said to me the nightmare scenario for Obama is that he wins big, he has huge majorities in the Congress, and, then the fractiousness on the Democratic side is just going to, go nuts. My sense from you is that actually you're like, no, actually we're going to get card check, and it's going to be awesome, and we're going to entrench ourselves, and then, we're going to have all these Democrats in Texas where they're going to lose, but they're going to be able to affect the legislature, and they're going to be able to, kind of affect kind of change in a kind of Democratic direction over the next decade. Is that fair to say? Do you think that there's a maturity and restraint on the part of the Democratic Party now that would allow them to?
Well, let's make a couple caveats, right? Number one, the nightmare scenario of Obama winning massively and then creating a massively Democratic Congress. I'll take that nightmare, man. I'm not sure I'll even win, so I think there's a lot to be curious about here in these early months. But I don't know what will happen. I think there's a possibility that the Democrats will be better at wielding power than they were before. Possibly not. I think that a lot of this is structural, however. I think that Congress has become much more parliamentary than it was before. A lot of what happened in the early 90s, which is really the last time you can look at Democrats with an executive trying to wield power, is that you had continually an extremely strong Dixiecrat base. You just don't have that anymore. It is gone. So, people talk about sort of American politics being a quiet tri-party system from, the 50s to the 90s.
Right.
Where you have, the Dixiecrats and the Republicans and the Democrats. But that isn't true anymore. So the real great level of ideological tension in the party is now gone, vanished, evaporated. Just won't be there again.
Jason Zengerman wrote a great piece about John Edwards in this context, and about how Edwards, is actually a figure who is kind of always characterized as a DLC or a moderate Democrat, but in fact, his voting record was almost identical to a Democrat from the Midwest or the Northeast, which I thought was very interesting, and about how you could still have that kind of appeal, without having a voting record that is substantially different. But yeah, no, that's interesting.
And so I think that'll be part of it. I also think that Democrats look at the history of Clinton, right? Certainly they look at health care. I've done a lot of reporting on this. And they look at what happened in 94, and they realize that, hey, maybe we should have just tried to unite around something, anything. Because getting something, anything, would have been better than getting nothing and then getting routed in the midterm elections. So I think that there's been sort of some legacy of desire for unity at all cost. And you could, by the way, see this going in a different problematic direction, in which they're willing to bargain away just about anything. They're willing to give away just about anything. And what you end up with are reforms, the Democratic Congress. That you know, the problems for Democrats in the past where people were too dogmatic on their policy, yeah. You can imagine it going the opposite direction. They become sort of too desperate to cut a deal. And then they'll just sort of pass anything, and the health care plan they pass is sort of chock full of giveaways. Frankly, I think that's an extremely likely outcome, and like to some degree I prefer it. I think that a lot of things can be fixed after the fact, and the initial sort of resistance to reform that sort of American politics structurally exhibits requires such a huge push that to just get over that barrier, sometimes you have to, make compromises you wouldn't like to, and then it's easier to fix that after the fact. But, you'd have to... But I could really see that sort of thing happening. But I actually do... My hunch is that the problems in the Democratic Party are actually going to veer towards the side of too much unity rather than too little, which is not to say you're not going to have votes that they can't win and so forth, but that when the assessment is taken, the reason they're not going to pass, or the reason you'll have problems with major legislative battles, is that the thing they tried to pass, either it failed completely because they just weren't able to get it over sort of Republican obstruction, or when they did pass it, it was robbed of just about everything that made it worth passing. I would not be shocked to see that happen at all. Or maybe you'll see a period of enlightened governance. At this point, I have no context in which I ever remember anybody in American politics doing anything worthwhile in any way at any time. So it's really impossible for me, even if I see elections being won by people I think are good, to believe that there will ever be a period in which politicians legislate in a way that I find admirable.
No, I think we're actually both too close in a way, because I just feel like since... I'd say probably 2002 or so, I just have felt so kind of mortified by everything everyone does that I sort of feel, kind of alien.
I remember sitting around the table in 06, right, and I was sitting there with Harold Myers and some other people from my magazine, and, me and Dane and the other sort of young writers in the magazine, we could not believe. There was no way we would take the Democrats would take Congress or the Democrats would take the Senate.
Yeah.
No way. It couldn't happen. And Harold just sort of looked at us at one point. He's a middle-aged guy, and he said, "It's really clear you guys have never lived through a Democratic victory before." And basically that was true. I mean, we were alive in 1992, but not really paying attention. And I think you do see that strain of almost like nihilism in young American progressives, that they really can't remember a time when things went well for progressivism. So, they try to fight the good fight. We try to fight the good fight, but there's a little bit of a inability to believe that it could actually end up anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, hate to be contentious. I mean, I do have a somewhat different view. I think that if there is a really substantial Obama victory, I think that you're going to see a lot of fraction and fragmentation. I think that you're going to see, for example, I think that Illinois is going to be a very interesting case. I think that there are a lot of races there that would come up in 2010. I think that, who, if Obama wins the presidency, who would take his place in the Senate? I think that, is it going to be Jesse Jackson Jr.? Is it going to be Jan Schakowsky? I think that, there are, because Illinois, I mean, I remember Chris Hayes wrote a neat piece about this, was ahead of the cycle in, kind of rooting out Republican corruption and then sort of, having a new slate of, progressive Democrats. And I think that, Blagojevich is kind of encountering a lot of legal difficulties. I think that there is going to be a kind of, very good market for a kind of solid suburban Republican who is not, too frightening. I think that it's interesting how, Daley's mayoralty has really changed the terrain of partisan politics in that state, by virtue of making the Democratic brand, a lot more attractive. But I think that there's going to be a turn there. I also think that, you made a very astute observation concerning climate change. I've been very closely watching the wrangling over climate change legislation and other advanced industrial democracies, particularly the English-speaking countries, which are, a little bit behind in terms of, moving ahead of the problem. And it's amazing because, outside of the United States, I mean, in Canada and Australia, for example, this is the central political question. And, these are, what you said about sort of, the regional dimension of it is very interesting because in Canada, for example, I mean, it's a country that's basically suffering from Dutch disease, because you have these regions that sort of are massively benefiting from, this food, fuel, credit crunch, and then you have others that are really suffering, and they share a single currency, and then kind of anything that's happening on the climate change side. So so the debate over carbon tax versus hard caps and technology fund. I mean, this is it's a cultural struggle, and I think that here you don't have the same kind of sharpness to that tension, but I mean it is going to be very, very interesting to see. You were talking about how unity within the Democratic Party and what it might do on the healthcare front. It might actually lead you to watering down the legislation or have it be so larded by kind of special interest. I think that that's exactly what we're likely to see in any kind of aggressive climate change legislation that will
I agree.
pass.
I'm extremely pessimistic about action on climate change. I cannot, and by the way, I think it's a huge vulnerability for Democrats, right? You can get all the CBO analyses you want about how one could make a cap-and-trade plan distributionally progressive, but the likelihood of that is extremely low in my estimation. And before you ever get there, the fundamental fact of what people who care about global warming want to do with carbon is make it more expensive so people don't use as much of it. Making gas more expensive is not a hugely popular political priority. Yeah. And I think Democrats are fairly good at saying things like cap and trade, which, hide that a little
And I think
bit.
Republicans have actually found
and by the way, I think that in a broader way, cap and trade plans would be helpful for people, and it would be good to move to that sort of economy, and people could see real gains from it. But even so, I think that you wouldn't have to work extremely hard to turn it into a huge political liability. And I think that that's going to be one of the real sort of, if Democrats really open up that discussion in the next 5 or 10 years, and if they do, I think Nancy Pelosi really does care about global warming, so you may see it happen. I think that if the Republican caucus gets its act together and wants to be incredibly irresponsible in the future of the planet, they could really make some electoral gains on it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I imagine, we disagree on the substance of the issue, but I think that, you're... one thing that I was also struck by is in the Goolsbee-Furman Wall Street Journal op-ed, when they were talking about the distributional consequences of the Obama tax plan, they were talking about how actually, his plan is actually going to be a net tax cut. It's going to be revenue negative, which is, really fascinating, given... I think that actually you can't really... I think that, the McCain... Virtually anything that McCain is saying about his tax plan, it's obviously not going to happen given opposition of a Democratic Congress. I think that, it's mostly fanciful, although it does tell us something about, kind of the issues that he cares about. So I think that, it's right to focus on it for criticism and for praise. But I think that, vis-a-vis the sort of Obama plan as well, I mean, I find it very, very hard to believe that we're going to see, anything much like it. It's also interesting because, kind of in terms of the payroll tax, it's sort of 10 years out, then you'll see that spike. I think that, but I mean, I was just really surprised by that because I was expecting them to do something revenue neutral. Given, I mean, the state of the tax code right now, you know what I mean?
Right, I agree. I think they've been very disappointing on almost all domestic policy, actually, but taxes in particular, where I think that, they really sort of buy into this Republican frame that, the conversation you should be having on taxes is they should be lower and less complicated, and maybe so. They should definitely be less complicated, but I actually think they should probably, in an aggregate way, be higher. Now, you can get that from, you can actually lower taxes on 80% of the population and raise them, fairly sharply on 20%. And then, for the average person, you've got a tax cut, and in the aggregate, you've got a revenue increase. But, I would actually like to see Democrats give some real thinking to taxes, and things like Robert Frank's progressive consumption tax, and I mean, there's really interesting thinking out there. I'd like to see Democrats move towards dedicated taxation, because I really think you have a problem when you're asking people to give revenues for a sort of generalized, vague, God knows reason. I'd much prefer to see healthcare, for instance, paid for out of a value-added tax that just people know that what they're buying is comprehensive health coverage. They understand. So if Republican politicians or Democratic politicians want to cut that, they realize that, okay, what they're going to be cutting is their health care coverage. I think right now, part of the problem, part of the dysfunction of the taxation conversation is that people don't know what they're buying. So, I mean, why not cut that? There's some level of waste in government. There's some level of, so maybe you should be getting some more money back. But in general, I mean, I think it's a place where you see not only very little courage, ideological courage from the Obama campaign. But I think you see the beginnings of, how some of these things can break down, because they're going to come in, they're going to tell people they need this big success on taxation, and Democrats, may pass something like it, lard it up a bit, and at the end of the day, at least from a progressive standpoint, what you'll have is not an extremely good bill.
It's interesting because I'm sort of more sympathetic to a VAT than most, and I actually do find the idea of having some dedicated revenue streams interesting. I mean, I think that, I'd want to mull it over. But, I mean, I think that actually Howard Dean did a very good job of talking about taxes when he talked about, what he called the Bush tax hike. I mean, in a way that I actually think it was ahead of its time. Obviously, I sort of don't, agree with it in every detail, but I think that the idea that, look at your total tax bill, look at your state and local taxes, look at your property taxes, look at also your health insurance premiums and other things that, kind of for all intents and purposes feel like a tax. These, kind of fixed costs of having a kind of stable middle-class life. And, yes, the balance of federal income taxes may have changed as part of that. But, I mean, the idea that, federal taxes fit into this broader framework, and what you want to do is actually, kind of approach this in a broader way to kind of like actually address your cost of living, and kind of what it takes for you to flourish, or what it takes for you to make economic progress. I think that is a very appealing message, and I actually think that the reason why I think that I actually just think that you've seen stirrings of a potential Republican revival. I think that increasing Republican sensitivity to the idea, going beyond gas prices, but that the cost of living is a legitimate issue, and that there are there are ways in which government kind of places roadblocks, but also ways in which actually more creative policy can make a difference in that vein. I mean, I think that the Republican Party is, of course, very resistant to this kind of thing, but I'm interested to see the kind of conversation that's likely to emerge, and I do hope that your idea could... Oh my God, we've been talking for a really long time, Ezra. Holy cow! Whatchamacallit, so is there anything else that's been...
Time flies with you, Ryan.
Is there anything else that's on...
Time flies when you're walking out.
I just wanted to say, by the way, that I actually am holding some garlic right now, because I feel like you're the Conor Oberst of the blogosphere. You have this very soulful, lyrical nature, yet you also have a kind of left-wing zeal. And so I thought that, kind of I would use this to ward off your kind of vampiric tendencies, because you're going to try to turn Blogging Heads viewers into progressive vampires who will then suck the blood out of other people. So I just wanted to kind of ward that off.
It's true. I am attempting to turn viewers progressive would be nice, but mainly into vampires.
Well, no, that way they could actually also sort of be much more energetic late at night. I wanted to ask you.
They can hang out in Tel Aviv. They can do that.
I've got to go. I'm so excited to go to Israel. I mean, I don't have a lot of friends who live there now, but I saw Surfwise, which is the best movie ever made, and everyone needs to watch it. But the guy, he goes to Tel Aviv and teaches them all how to surf in the 50s. I mean, it's a documentary. But
I went to the beach every day.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I didn't like the beach until recently, and then I went to the beach and it was like, hey, beach, not bad. I mean, I just really hate looking at shirtless people, but that's neither here nor there. So
in Tel Aviv, you won't. In Tel Aviv, man, the shirtless people are incredibly like every guy has an 8-pack. There's no fat on anybody. It's extremely bad for you psychologically. But aesthetically,
no, I understand that Israel is just filled with like beautiful, like Moroccan ladies, which is sort of really not.
Well, not just Moroccan. I mean, it turns out in a way that I hadn't. In America, right? The stereotype of the Jew is sort of Woody Allen and Philip Roth. And then, like, to go into sort of, like, overlord class of Jewish super people is, like, extremely disconcerting. Because, like, I'm still just of the sort of Philip Roth and Woody Allen mold and, like, just read a lot of books and, like, stay inside most of the day and play on the internet. Well, and I really feel like I'm missing out.
I'm a sort of partisan of kind of, Banglo supremacy. So, like, I think that, I'm a kind of philo Banglo. One thing that I find very interesting is just the way that there's like a network of countries that, as a right-winger, I instinctively like. Like, I really... Actually, then there are countries that I'm not supposed to like Canada, that I really like. But then I love Israel. And then now, like, I like Georgia. You know what I mean? I have for a while. But it's interesting, just like there's like
we're all Georgians now, Reihan.
Well, no, it's true, it's true.
We gotta like Georgia.
Particularly me. Actually, one of my dear friends is from Georgia. I mean, she's, Russian Jew who's, she was born in Georgia. But I wanted to... so you noted a Harold Meyerson column in which he was talking about, Russia qua authoritarian threat versus China, concluding that China is, in fact, in some sense... But you have some thoughts about that, and I'd love to hear them.
Okay, we should probably do a quote, because as you say, we've been boring people for a long time, and I'm worried my vampiric my vampiric charm wears off after a while. The basic thing on Harold's column, Harold is one of my bosses, in many ways a mentor of mine, a wonderful guy, beautiful writer. I want to not be fired also. But the thing about this column is that it begins by sort of going through the Russia invasion of Georgia. You know, that's bad, he says. Yep. We don't support that invasion. But then it says, but the real sort of assertion of dominance, which should really scare you, are the Chinese, opening ceremonies. And he points out in particular this sort of like portion of the ceremony where they like have this 9-year-old boy who escaped the horrible earthquake in the Sichuan province, then went back to save his friends, and somebody said, why? And he said, I'm a hall monitor. I mean, it was my duty to take care of
That is the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. I think that's incredibly badass. What a cool dude.
And Harold goes and says he didn't go back because, they were his friends and he cared for them. And this was like the sort of creeping authoritarianism. And, I mean, sort of like, then like 5 or 8 paragraphs of like real sort of China scaring, about like their tremendous authoritarianism tendencies and the ways in which it's going to spread all over the world. And then it sort of ends with this, to some degree traditionally labor liberal take on the challenges they pose, economically to democracies. And I think just a couple things should be said. I think it is extremely, extremely dangerous to pretend that China is not merely sort of a checkered country, as many are, but a particularly maligned force. I think that from just about any point of view you want to look at it, the lifting out of poverty of hundreds of millions of people in the most populous country on the planet is a huge economic success, and people should be really pleased with it. But it has happened so quickly, so unbelievably quickly, that as sort of scholars point out, they're a very fragile state. There's essentially one layer of government, very little civil society beneath it. I mean, if that collapses, they're really going down the tubes. At the same time, they're a very insecure, and I think as Orville Schell writes in the New York Review of Books this week, humiliated nation with a sort of long history of grievance and feelings of not being taken seriously on the world stage.
They've had a bunch of interesting pieces about
which is
this.
Not
they
to
also
say
had a piece about that bizarre movie about a Chinese student who murdered his mentor.
Right. It's in the same piece. Yeah. That's in the Orville Schell piece. But it's not to say that people shouldn't oppose, China's excesses, oppose the portions of their foreign policy which are not regrettable but often abhorrent, like their support for Khartoum. But to just say that, I think the sort of defining foreign policy issue of our time is going to be whether or not you're comfortable with multipolarity. Yeah. I don't think that America is going to lose superpower status, but it's not going to be alone anymore. The period of it being alone was, I think, very aberrational, and, other countries are going to get big and throw some weight around. And you can look at that as cooperative, right? If a Chinese scientist, if they train 15 million cancer researchers and one of them figures out a cure, we get that cure. So you can imagine this as being an extremely good thing, or you can imagine it as being a threat. Neocons have at times imagined it as being a threat and made it sort of an explicit point of policy to knock down potential superpowers. Government document. But labor liberals, too, have a tendency, because of the pressure on wages and the sort of, flood of cheap goods and the downward sort of pressure on labor standards, to fear this as well. And it's not that I don't get the fear, but that I think it is just incredibly dangerous. And, to sort of say, there are things we should be cautious about and ways in which we should try to think seriously about, organizing Chinese labor or whatever, fair enough. But to, sort of reach to make the Chinese look scary and to make, sort of Americans fear their ascent, I think that is fighting a trend in a way that could put you on the wrong side of history and be just, incredibly lethal down the road if, if China and the Chinese do begin to sense a hostility and a certain antipathy from Americans.
I think that,
that's my point on the piece.
It's interesting. Like, I remember one thing that was really influential for me was reading Andrew J. Nathan. He had a really neat book. I think it was called what was it called? I think it was called The Great Wall and the Empty Fortress. He also sort of, has written a lot of stuff just looking into the kind of self-perception and sort of, kind of worldview of the kind of, Chinese leadership elite. And I think that, you make an excellent point in that, it's a state that's extremely vulnerable. They have very long, undefended borders. They also kind of really, Francis Fukuyama made the point in earlier blogging heads that they dramatically slashed the size of their military budget in the late 70s. And sort of now, there is modernization, and modernization involves actually, reducing the size. And it's also the military there is deeply involved in economic life. And it's a very sort of complicated picture, and I think it's important that we appreciate that. That said, as a, neoconservative and some would say neocon apologist, I do think that, there is actually a fairly sophisticated view on the neoconservative right, namely that look, I mean, yes, we want to be sure that China becomes a global citizen, or what have you, becomes a stakeholder, but also it's very important that we actually build a kind of platform that other states, kind of recognize that they can plug into, that they can draw on, and having sort of, kind of deepening our sort of cooperation with other states that feel concerned by China's rise. And of course, kind of leave those institutions open to some level of Chinese cooperation as well, kind of presuming that they're, willing to play by the rules that are established not by us unilaterally, but rather by a community of states that are hoping to kind of deepen
it's
peace.
It's testament to, I think, your intellectual generosity and sort of decency of spirit that you make much more sophisticated and nuanced cases for other people's opinions than they make for them. I would just say that a lot of the neocon writing on China, and I think people here like Kaplan and Kagan, is characterized by a sense of confrontation.
Which Kaplan are you referring to, just out of curiosity?
Actually, you can look at a couple of them, but Lawrence Kaplan, I remember, wrote this piece in The Atlantic about the ways in which we should fund our Navy to be...
Oh, you mean Robert G. Kaplan? Yeah, look, I'm a big Robert G. Kaplan fan, and I think that actually he had a wonderful piece recently on Burma, and I think that it's just a very interesting perspective on the game that China is playing and the ways it's actually a very sophisticated one in which they're actually it's not
may be
narrowly
sophisticated,
ideological,
but there's a militarism to it that I think is extremely dangerous.
I disagree.
And,
I think it's not. Yeah.
There's a sophistication that can get lost when you get into sort of great power competition, and I think sort of Kagan's cover story on the ways in which we should build up our military, our naval force to fight China was arguably the scariest piece I've ever read in American letters.
Look, I don't agree. I
but
don't necessarily.
In general. Sure, go for it.
I think that I don't necessarily agree with every detail, but I mean, I certainly do think that, American naval supremacy, sort of is a platform. It's something that has actually kind of allowed, kind of a level of flourishing. And it's also true that the Chinese, they're depending on us to defend their sea lanes, and I think that there is certain anxiety about that. So look, I'm actually working on a piece that will take a long time called Strategic Empathy. You know what I mean? It's sort of, so I mentioned this idea of strategic empathy and about how when you have strategic empathy, actually the world looks quite different. I think it's important. I think it's something that neoconservatives, ought to appreciate. I think actually some of them do. But I think that, when you're looking at what's happening in Burma, what China's doing, it's not ideological per se, but what it is doing is actually kind of preventing sort of other states from, actually having the freedom of action that they'd like to have, and actually they're simultaneously being undermined and actually patted on the head. So and this is obviously something that the United States has done in its own its own way. And I think that actually, that's something that we ought to learn from. And I think that, when we see that happening, offering an alternative, offering sort of, again, sort of like another avenue, just letting states in the region know China is not your only option, China is not your only partner.
I
think
that's
very important. And I actually think that's the heart of the neoconservative case about the region.
I think it may be part of it, and I don't think we have time to get super into this, but the trick here is that you have to do that without getting into a confrontation with China. And that a lot of these pieces, I don't argue with the need for American naval superiority, although, my God, nobody is challenging that. But it really concerns me when it is argued in context of a possible war with China. It worries me when, Harold is pushing, making the point, the sort of very basic point about pressures from huge pools of global low-wage labor, but attempting to intertwine that, because it'll be more sort of, I think, rhetorically effective, with a piece about the dangers of the Chinese political system, which may be there, but I think you shouldn't be scaring people about without, in terms of their 9-year-olds who went back into a...
I think China's a lot more jerry-rigged and decentralized than people appreciate. I actually think that that's...
And so I just would say in the broad point that, what really concerns me are people who, even if what they would like if they were made czar is a sort of sophisticated take wherein you're building up American sort of both moral and economic and military capabilities so that, you can be that avenue for states that want to see some ascension. And by the way, we're not doing a good job of that. Part of China's influence is sort of going to places in Africa and Asia and Latin America where, and giving them the infrastructure help that we can't do anymore because we're, stuck pumping this money into Iraq and Afghanistan. But as a broader sense, I think the real trick here is to be able to do that without getting into a confrontation with China. And that when people begin to
I think some of the reason why we don't, by the way, come into those states is also
in terms of Chinese misdeeds and sort of Chinese scare tactics, I think you're really doing something dangerous. Not you, but you being sort of broad.
I think when you're looking at the states where sort of China is trying to build influence in sub-Saharan Africa, I think that there are often states that we wouldn't feel comfortable, aiding in that same way. I see what you mean, but I think that it's also interesting what they're trying to do, and there's also an increasing backlash against sort of so-called Chinese assistance because of the way that they're seeking to undermine the sovereignty of a lot of these states. I mean, the kind of the writ is the idea that it's a kind of policy experimentalism. Their kind of ideological argument is that it's very pro-sovereignty, et cetera. Well, yeah, except that they actually seek these very long-term concessions. It's actually kind of a very colonial model in some respect. Mm-hmm. But no, I totally agree. Like, I think that we don't want to demonize the Chinese. I think we want to have a constructive relationship with them. We want them to be a stakeholder. But I also think that we don't want to neglect our other partners in the region. And I think that actually kind of demonstrating that we remain engaged, and that's something where the Bush administration has had a lot of successes. But I also think that they've had some recent failures. So I think that it's a very mixed picture. But I mean, I do think that I'm certainly more inclined to the neoconservative view that our partnership with China, with Korea, with Singapore, and sort of with other states in the region, should be deepened in a lot of ways. And I think that just having those conversations, sort of keeping the flow of information open is just a very valuable thing. And to let China know that sort of like assuming that they're willing to make sort of some concessions here and there. But actually, like on a slightly unrelated note, and I know that we need to end, is that it's interesting because like when people complain about China's environmental record, one of the reasons why it's sort of problematic is that actually it actually isn't this kind of centralized tyranny. It actually, they actually do give a lot of wherewithal and room to kind of local policy elites who are actually generally selected on pretty meritocratic grounds. So I find the Chinese state extremely, extremely interesting. And I'm I'm so grateful to you for taking the time out to chat with me, Ezra. I really appreciate it.
And to you, Ryan, always a pleasure.
All right, I guess I'll talk to you soon.
Take care,
Ezra. Bye.